During the 1890s, the race to reach the geographic North Pole was still an open contest. In 1897, a three-man team set out on one of the most ambitious expeditions to the North Pole ever documented. The expedition set out not by boat, but by balloon. After just 2 days of flight, the team crash-landed and found themselves lost amid hundreds of miles of broken ice. This is the story of Andrée's disastrous Arctic balloon expedition. Solomon August Andrée, a Swedish engineer, was eager to be the first in the race to the North Pole. While the South Pole lies on a continental landmass, the North Pole is located in the middle of the Arctic Ocean in waters that are almost permanently covered with constantly shifting sea ice. With this in mind, Andrée proposed a plan. He would let the wind propel a hydrogen balloon across the Arctic Sea and passing near or even right over the North Pole on the way. Andrée was an experienced balloonist. In 1893, he purchased his own, the Severe, and subsequently made 9 journeys with it, starting from either Stockholm or Gothenburg and travelling a combined distance of 1,500 kilometres. Getting into the late 1800s, balloons had already been in use for years. At that time, balloons could stay afloat for about 15 days in a stretch. However, Andrée sought to double that. Hundreds of layers of varnished silk were used to make Andrée's hydrogen balloon, which was made in Paris. The balloon measured 30 meters high and weighed over a ton. The balloon was subsequently named Örnen, which translates to eagle in English, and was delivered directly to Svalbard from its manufacture in Paris without even being tested. Measurements taken afterwards showed it to be leaking more than expected, and Andrée failed to acknowledge the risk. A persuasive speaker and fundraiser, Andrée found it easy to gain support for his ideas. At a lecture in 1895 for the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, Andrée explained his ambitious plan, and the audience was convinced by his arguments. In 1896, Andrée picked 2 men to be a part of the expedition. The first being 47-year-old meteorological researcher Niels Gustav Ekholm and 23-year-old physics and chemistry student Niels Strindberg. The main scientific purpose of the expedition was to map the area by means of aerial photography. In the summer of 1896, Andrée was given a hero's send-off from Sweden before heading to Svalbard, a Norwegian archipelago where they would begin their first attempt. For 3 weeks, Andrée tried to leave, but never got favourable wind conditions. Having to return to Sweden and set about raising money again was a major setback. That winter, Ekholm resigned, saying that he doubted the balloon could retain sufficient hydrogen to make the trip. He was replaced by Knut Frankel, a 27-year-old civil engineer. From Ekholm's own measurements, he stated the worst leakage came from the approximately 8 million tiny stitching holes along the seams, which no amount of glued-on strips of silk would seal. Ekholm estimated that the balloon was losing around 68 kilograms of lift force per day. Taking into account its heavy load, Ekholm estimated it would be able to stay airborne for 17 days at most, not 30. It wasn't until the summer of 1897 until the 3-man team returned to Svalbard. They arrived at Danes Island in May in preparation to launch from a balloon hangar built the year prior. The team packed on board sledges, 4 months worth of provisions, tents, skis, guns and ammunition, and were essentially just as well equipped as other expeditions. On the 11th of July, in a steady wind from the southwest, the 3 explorers climbed into the Basgin. The support team cut away the last ropes holding onto the balloon and it rose slowly into the sky. Within moments though, the balloon began to descend rapidly. Moving out low over the water, It was pulled so far down by the friction of the long drag ropes against the ground which caused it to dip the basket into the water. Most of the ropes unscrewed at once and 530 kilograms of rope were lost, while the team were made to dump more than 210 kilos of sand overboard to get the basket clear of the water. 740 kilos of essential weight was lost in the first few minutes. Before it was even well clear of the launch site, Eagle had turned from a supposedly steerable craft into an ordinary hydrogen balloon with a few ropes hanging from it at the mercy of the wind. The balloon then rose to 700 meters, where the lower air pressure made the hydrogen escape faster through the 8 million little holes. The team had two means of communication with the outside world: buoys and homing pigeons. Steel cylinders encased in cork were intended to be dropped from the balloon into the water or onto the ice and to be carried to civilization by the currents. One was dispatched by Andrée on the 11th of July, a few hours after takeoff, and reads, "Our journey goes well so far. We sail at an altitude of about 250 meters. Weather delightful, spirits high." The second method was pigeons. Andrée would send with message cylinders containing pre-printed instructions in Norwegian asking the finder to pass the messages onto the paper's address in Stockholm. He released at least 4 pigeons, but only one was ever retrieved, by a Norwegian steamer who shot it on site. The Eagle travelled for 2 days and 3.5 hours, during which time, according to Andrée, none of the 3 men got any sleep. Fog soon enclosed the men and the balloon struck the surface continually. 8 touches in 30 minutes, bumpings every 5th minute, paid visits to the surface and stamped it about every 50 meters. Nevertheless, humour good, Andrée wrote. Early on the morning of the 14th of July, the basket began to hit the ice again. Then the balloon rose to a great height, lost hydrogen quickly, and crashed onto a pack of ice. They had been adrift for just over 2 days, travelling 832 kilometres, about 482 kilometres south of the pole. They were now lost amid hundreds of miles of broken ice. The expedition took a week to select what to pack in their sledges and where to go. The North Pole was discounted as an option, so they decided to travel to a depot of food and ammunition which was laid down for their safety at Cape Flora in Franz Josef Land. The expedition took most of the remaining provisions with them leaving the crash site, including guns, tents, ammunition, cooking utensils, making a load on each sled of more than 200 kilograms. After a week of hard trekking, they left behind a pile of food and non-essential equipment. It quickly became necessary to hunt for food after supplies ran low. They shot and ate seals, walruses, and especially polar bears throughout the march. When they saw no path through the labyrinth of ice, Andrée would take his gun and go and look for one. They travelled for weeks until Frankel began to suffer from snow blindness. On July the 31st, by taking an astronomical reading with their instruments, they discovered that they had drifted west with the ice faster than they had walked east. On the 4th of August, they decided to aim southwest instead, hoping to reach a depot there after a 6 to 7 week march. The terrain in that direction was extremely difficult, but there was occasional relief in the form of open water. The little boat that they had brought and assembled was a functional method of travel. Between August the 4th and September the 9th, Andrée stopped making diary entries. The ice had carried them approximately 130 kilometers southeast when they had been trying to travel the same distance southwest. By September the 12th, the explorers were exhausted and ended up camping on a large floating sheet of ice, letting it take them where it would. They built a winter home on the floating ice with walls made of water-reinforced snow. For 2 days, a violent northwest wind pinned them down, and they had concluded that there was no hope of reaching the depot. Wintering on the ice had become unavoidable, Our position is not specially good, Andrée wrote. The ice then began to break up directly under the hut on the 2nd of October, which forced them to make a move to the island of Kvitoya. The very last entry by Andrée on October the 8th read, "It feels fine to be able to sleep here on fast land as a contrast, with the drifting ice out upon the ocean where we constantly heard the cracking and grinding. We shall have to gather driftwood and bones of whales, and will have to do some moving around when the weather permits." It's inferred from the final entry of Andrée's on October the 8th that the 3 men perished shortly afterwards. When they died isn't known. Strindberg's diary has a final notation on October 17th saying, "Home 7:05 AM. But it's written in ink when all the other entries in the diaries are in pencil and ink freezes. A persuasive explanation was that Strindberg made the notation before they left, expecting to arrive home in Sweden by train at 7:05. What exactly killed them isn't known. Poisoning from the metal cans was suggested, in addition to an accidental gunshot wound, drowning, dehydration, a psychotic episode of murder, suicide using opium, scurvy, vitamin A poisoning from eating polar bear liver, polar bear attack, asphyxiation caused by breathing fumes from a cook stove in a poorly ventilated tent. The sailors from the Bratvarg, seeing the woolen jerseys and cloth coats that the 3 men were wearing, decided that they had died from cold and exhaustion. Early on the afternoon of October the 5th, 1930, escorted by 5 destroyers and 5 airplanes, the remains of the 3 explorers arrived in Stockholm on the Svenskund, the same ship that had taken them to Danes Island. The first undisputed expedition to successfully reach the North Pole by air wasn't until nearly 30 years later. The airship Norge flew over the North Pole with 16 men on board and was the first to reach it by air in 1926. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this type of content, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. Cheers, bye.